In every generation of competitive Pokemon, there will be one central presence that stands tall among everything else. The number one Pokemon of a metagame is like the sun that everything else orbits around. These number one Pokemon tend to be the easiest to throw onto a team and find success with, and they are the Pokemon that everything else is trying to beat. Every single generation of competitive singles has its own unique number one Pokemon, and I'm sure there are countless videos praising all of their incredible strengths and advantages. But what about their flaws? These are probably the Pokemon with the least amount of flaws in their respective metagames compared to everything else. But no Pokemon is perfect. Why don't we take a look at the number one Pokemon of every single generation and highlight their worst qualities for once? But before we do, please subscribe to the channel as quickly as possible, or I will push the Pokemon Slugma off of this large building. His chances of survival are slim. Thank you. First up, the best Pokemon of Generation 1 OU is Tauros, and I'm sure we all know why. Tauros excels in the world of Gen 1 mechanics, where normal typing is excellent offensively and defensively. Since fighting types are terrible and you aren't really threatened by any relevant super effective moves, normal stab is also excellent with some of the greatest moves in the game to its name, such as Body Slam and Hyper Beam. Tauros also functions the best as a normal type physical attacker and game-ending cleaner with Hyper Beam because of its coverage options, including Earthquake to hit rock types and crucially hit Gengar, who would otherwise be immune to your normal type moves, and Blizzard, which hits Rhydon, another normal type check. Tauros also has other cool options in its moveset like Stomp, Fire Blast, Thunderbolt, etc. to defeat other checks. It is pretty close between Tauros and Snorlax for the number one spot, and some people do think Snorlax is a bit better, but the general consensus is still that Tauros is number one. So what are some of Tauros's biggest flaws? It's a little bit hard to list flaws on such an excellent Pokemon that is pretty much an auto-include on every single Gen 1 team. But based on what you've heard about Tauros, you might expect to queue up Gen 1 and just win instantly with this thing. It's not quite that simple. Tauros matches up pretty poorly against fellow normal types Snorlax and Chansey, especially if they're running Reflect. Tauros can't quite one-shot anything. It needs to significantly chip things to be able to clean up in an endgame. Tauros is slower than some relevant enemies like Alakazam and Starmie, and Tauros is a little bit limited in its moveset as well. The standard moveset of Body Slam, Hyper Beam, Earthquake, Blizzard will get pretty easily beaten by Cloyster, who has incredible physical bulk, can't be frozen by Blizzard and shrugs off the damage, and also threatens to explode against you, a very favorable trade for them. So Tauros is pretty easily checked by a common Pokemon. Tauros does have the ability to run Thunderbolt to hit Cloyster, but it has to replace another important option to be able to do so, like Blizzard or Earthquake, and if you cut one of those, you're going to be bad against either Rhydon or Gengar now. Even though Tauros is the most effective at what it does, being a normal type physical cleanup Pokemon, it's actually pretty hard to set up for a Tauros endgame. It's still better than everything else at being a fast normal type threat, but it does have its exploitable limitations and reasonable ways to respond to it. Moving on to Generation 2, where the best Pokemon in OU is Snorlax, and this one is not close. Snorlax is by far the number one Pokemon, and this is going to be a tough one to come up with any flaws for Gen 2 Snorlax, because this is the most dominant Pokemon in OU history. It is on absolutely every single viable team. If you don't bring a Snorlax, you are trolling. And this Pokemon is considerably more powerful than everything else. Its stats are excellent. The new item Leftovers is a fantastic boon for Snorlax, providing it with significant percentage-based chip healing. The new move Curse makes Snorlax into an incredible win condition, and Snorlax has unbelievable moveset variety with options like Thunder and Fire Blast to hit its checks such as Cloyster and Skarmory, Self-Destruct to go more aggressive and sacrifice your Snorlax for a KO against the enemy. This Pokemon gets immense value out of Rest and Sleep Talk, which heals you all the way back up to full HP and cures your status ailments, and with Sleep Talk you can even act while asleep. So what are Snorlax's flaws, if any? I suppose whatever Snorlax set you choose to bring in this generation will have some limitations. The standard Curse boost sweeping set is a bit passive and predictable, easily stopped by something like Skarmory, and if you're choosing to run Sleep Talk, that's a valuable move slot that could be spent on extra coverage. Curse Rest Sleep Talk Snorlax only has normal as its singular attacking type, so Gengar will completely wall these kinds of Snorlax sets. If you are running some surprise options with a more generally aggressive Snorlax, maybe with 4 attacks instead of going for the curse or rest game plan, this kind of Snorlax can fizzle out quickly. You'll get 1 or 2 surprise turns, maybe you are widely threatening while you're in, but your health is more limited if you're not running rest. And perhaps the enemy's Snorlax, if they are a greedier Snorlax, will get the last laugh as you lose yours early and theirs has long-term staying power. I suppose this is a bit of a stretch. I mean, every Pokemon can only run 4 moves, so there's always going to be some limitations with that. Even if you have a diverse move pool, you can't run absolutely everything. But at the same time, there's enough in the Gen 2 metagame to scout Snorlax's moveset, respond to it in time. At least it's a slow threat, it's not fast, it's not going to demand a response instantly and have initiative in that exchange. Even though Snorlax may be the center of the universe and you need to run one on your team, it does feel like you have enough to exploit the enemy's Snorlax, whatever they choose to run on it. In Generation 3, the best Pokemon is Tyranitar, according to the most recent viability rankings, which was updated this month in November. There is some disagreement among the community about who the number 1 Pokemon truly is. Some say Skarmory, some say Metagross, some weird people say Blissey, but most agree Tyranitar's number 1. Tyranitar has the powerful Sandstream ability, which sets permanent Sandstorm on the field, and this has an immediate impact as soon as it hits the field. Everything else will take chip damage unless they're Ground, Rock, or Steel type, so Tyranitar itself is not getting chipped by the sand, but many enemies are. And that's free residual damage. It often cancels out leftovers healing. This has a significant impact against enemies like Blissey and Snorlax, who rely on that leftovers healing for their sustain. On top of having an instant impact upon hitting the field, Tyranitar is an incredible varied and powerful threat on its own merits. The most immediately threatening Tyranitar would be the Dragon Dance set, which is an incredibly effective win condition and sweeper. Tyranitar has a fantastic physical move pool with Stab, Rock Slide, Earthquake, and other coverage options in the final move slot to take on much of the metagame. Mixed Tyranitar is a good set, taking advantage of your powerful special attacking move pool. Pursuit Tyranitar is a great utility Pokemon able to eliminate Gengar to support teammates, and just operate as a bulky check to things that can also run mixed coverage as well. And Tyranitar is very customizable. There are 4 attack bulky sets, substitute focus punch sets. There's a lot going on with Tyranitar. You can use it in many different ways. Unlike all the number 1 Pokemon mentioned so far though, Tyranitar in Gen 3 is not necessarily an auto-include Pokemon, and in fact, some of the best teams in the game benefit from not running Tyranitar, because some teams don't want to set sand on their side of the field. If they are running Pokemon like Blissey or Suicune that appreciate Sandstorm not being on the field, the game plan of these teams is to actually eliminate the enemy's Tyranitar and clear sand using something like Rain Dance or Sunny Day. In fact, some players think that putting Tyranitar on your team is a bit of a wasted slot sometimes. Tyranitar may be effective as a Pokemon in many ways with its Dragon Dance set, Pursuit set, etc., but sometimes that slot is better served with some more utility. Maybe a Claydol to rapid spin, get rid of spikes from your side of the field, or a Dugtrio to trap and eliminate enemies and create more consistency in your team. Some other defensive Pokemon to take heat off of your allies. The top player ABR made a good point that Tyranitar feels like a jack of all trades but a master of none, whereas a Pokemon like Claydol is more specialized in its particular role of clearing hazards, and therefore can be more valuable in teams sometimes. While Tyranitar is excellent, there are valid reasons not to use it, and some players actually don't think it's that fantastic to put on every single team without thinking about it. And there are other team styles where Tyranitar doesn't really fit, like more all-in offense teams built around Dugtrio traps and Metagross Explosion. In Generation 4, the best Pokemon according to the most recent viability rankings is Jirachi. This is a bit of a contentious one because Tyranitar and Latias both have a real case for the number 1 spot, but at the moment, Jirachi is considered number 1, and probably for most of the game's history, this has been true as well. Most would agree Jirachi is the top Pokemon in Gen 4. Jirachi was already really good in Gen 3, but in Gen 4 it got significantly buffed, not only with the new physical special split, opening up more options, especially for physical attacks in Jirachi's moveset, but also because Jirachi gained the incredible new Iron Head option. Iron Head is a 80 power steel type attack with a 30% chance to flinch. And thanks to Jirachi's Serene Grace ability, this move has a 60% chance to flinch if used by Jirachi. 60% flinch chance is really powerful, and this is something that every team needs some sort of response against, or it will just get eaten alive. Unable to act at all, slowly getting chipped down. Not only does Jirachi represent this incredible threat with that powerful stab Iron Head with the massive flinch chance, Jirachi is an unbelievably varied Pokemon with so many different options. It can run defensive sets with Wish support. It now has access to Stealth Rock, which was another significant buff. Stealth Rock is the most impactful hazard in the game. Jirachi also gained U-Turn, which was incredible. This is a fantastic pivoting move. Jirachi now has access to new special attacking options, such as Grass Knot, which is fantastic coverage. So Jirachi can be anything. Physical attacker, support Pokemon, choice scarf, speed control Pokemon, defensive utility, support Pokemon, or just a potpourri of whatever you want. Chuck whatever coverage you need, whatever random utility you need, pivoting, hazards. Jirachi can do it all. And you could even say Jirachi got an indirect buff from the new type berries, because Shuka Berry and Oka Berry allow Jirachi free turns of safety to either KO something or act as a free opportunity to set up a Calm Mind or whatever. Get a wish through, whatever you want. And of course, Jirachi is great at spreading paralysis with Body Slam, which has its paralysis chance buffed to 60%. Obviously really good. And this is even able to paralyze ground types, which you can't normally do with a simple Thunder Wave. So what does Jirachi have going against it? I mean, this Pokemon sounds nearly perfect. What are the flaws? Jirachi has 100 stats across the board in all of its stats, allowing it to be built in any way you want. But if you think about it, 100 is not a very high number. Jirachi can do a lot of things, but it's not going to particularly excel at any of them as much as other Pokemon are. Its real value is in its versatility, but once the surprise is lost, similar to what I said about Snorlax earlier, Jirachi is going to become a little bit more predictable and easy to manage. The standard Iron Head Jirachi set is actually pretty easily stopped. Heatran is really effective against that. Pokemon like Magnezone and Swampert also quite good. There are some cases where you can lose 1v1 to just really bad flinch RNG, but that probably won't happen if you resist Iron Head. Probably the most consistent Jirachi sets are the defensive ones with Wish and Protect, because they can do their job most consistently, and Jirachi is a pretty effective defensive Pokemon in a world with permanent Sand and Stealth Rock, because it resists Stealth Rock and is immune to Sand. But even this set, there's plenty in the metagame to overpower it. There's a lot more powerful attacks introduced here, like Close Combat. Your Dragon Dance Gyarados, who has Earthquake and Stab Waterfall. Flygon exists, who threatens you with Stab Earthquake as well. So every Jirachi set has advantages to it, but also exploitable flaws. Of all the Pokemon so far, this is probably, in my opinion, the most frustrating one to play against. I feel like in Gen 4, the surprise value feels more impactful, because there sometimes is less time to respond to a surprise coverage option, or maybe their Type Berry catches you off guard, and that can create a big swing. And Iron Head is just really annoying as well. But at the same time, there is a lot of tools in the metagame to respond to what Jirachi can do. And its stats are not actually that high compared to some other things. Up next, you've got Latios in Generation 5. And this is actually going to be a tough one, because Latios is an incredible Pokemon. I think you can genuinely chuck Latios on any Gen 5 team at all, no matter what weather you're running, whether you're Hyper Offense, Stall, something in between. You can chuck Latios on and it will just be good. This Pokemon is crazy powerful. For pretty straightforward reasons. It has great stats, it clicks Draco Meteor. It's got a bit of set variety. The most common set will be Scarf, but there's also, bulky Calm Mind sets with Colbur Berry to live dark type attacks, or I think White Herb is a set with Draco Meteor. You can run HP Fire, sometimes to hit Ferrothorn. But most sets are just going to hit you with Dragon moves. They might run Surf to hit Tyranitar, and other things like Landorus Therian. This is a very straightforward number one Pokemon, probably the simplest one here, maybe since Tauros. It sort of just clicks moves that are powerful, and it's very good at doing this. So what does Latios have going against it? The biggest thing Latios has going against it is probably its poor matchup against Tyranitar. Tyranitar is incredibly common, and Tyranitar gets a special defense boost in the sand since Gen 4, so it can shrug off Draco Meteor from Latios, and it can trap Latios with Pursuit. Latios is often just completely neutralized and defeated in swift succession by a simple Tyranitar. Latios does have some tools to overpower Tyranitar, that Colbur Berry set I mentioned, which will weaken one dark type move and allow Latios to sometimes overpower Tyranitar. Choice Spec Surf will do considerable damage as well, especially if hazards are up. That can sometimes actually win the interaction. But still, Tyranitar is this looming threat, watching over Latios at all times, that is able to trap and eliminate you, and Tyranitar is extremely common as well. That being said, though, not all teams are sand teams. Some are rain teams or hail teams or sandless offense teams, and those teams are going to struggle against Latios much more because they don't run Tyranitar. There are other checks to Latios in the game, like Scizor, Jirachi. Maybe you can go in a more aggressive direction and just be offensive and run Mamoswine, who has Stab Ice Shard, which hits Latios really hard with priority, so it outruns the Choice Scarf. But yeah, at least Latios has a horrendous matchup against perhaps the other top dog of the metagame in Tyranitar. The number one Pokemon of Generation 6 OU actually surprised me. At the moment, the number one Pokemon is Excadrill. I always thought that it was Clefable, and I think back in the day it was Clefable. But these days, Excadrill has achieved the top spot, and I guess you can understand why. Excadrill is damn good in this metagame. Excadrill has a great ground steel typing, which is good offensively and defensively. It has access to both Stealth Rock and Rapid Spin, which makes it a fantastic all-in-one utility guy. And Excadrill is pretty damn threatening as well. This Pokemon gets two fantastic abilities: Sand Rush, which offers double speed in the Sandstorm, and Mold Breaker, which ignores enemy abilities. It's a fantastic fit on Excadrill because it allows this Pokemon to set Stealth Rock in the face of Magic Bounce users like Mega Diancie, and it allows Excadrill to Earthquake against Levitate Pokemon such as Rotom Wash, Gengar, or Latios. Steel feels a lot better in Gen 6 in many ways. It did lose its resistance to Ghost and Dark, but it now hits Fairy super effectively and resists Fairy, so you are very threatening to the other most popular Pokemon, Clefable, and other Fairy types in the format as well, such as Mega Diancie, Mega Altaria, etc. I suppose Excadrill here in Gen 6 feels a little bit similar to Great Tusk in Generation 9, with its access to hazards, hazard removal, and a powerful offensive typing for the format, as well as an ability that allows it to threaten a lot of common enemies like Rotom Wash, Latios, etc. I think this is very cool actually. I'm a big fan of Excadrill, so that's fun. Excadrill even has access to Swords Dance to turn into a Boost Sweeper if it wants. But what is wrong with Excadrill? What are some of its flaws? Even though Excadrill has a lot going for it, it's incredibly easy to fit on teams and has this central presence here, this one is a little bit easier to stop than some of these other Pokemon. Excadrill is pretty easily stopped by a lot of common Pokemon, like Landorus Therian, Skarmory, Gliscor, Slowbro, etc. Excadrill can choose to run Toxic to be able to at least negatively affect these switch-ins somehow, especially Landorus Therian. But not only are many of your checks not worried about Toxic, like Slowbro, Gliscor, and Skarmory, but running Toxic takes away an important move slot from something else. Even if there are Pokemon that aren't completely safe switch-ins against Excadrill, maybe they're immune to ground but vulnerable to Stab Iron Head, there are still plenty of Pokemon that can pivot in against Excadrill if it clicks a certain thing and then force it out and threaten it, like Mega Charizard Y or Keldeo. Cofagrigus is also a new rising star of Gen 6 OU that matches up pretty well against Excadrill, blocking Rapid Spin and walling it decently enough with its high physical defense, as well as crippling it with Will-O-Wisp. I gotta say, Excadrill feels like one of the more balanced number one Pokemon on here. It is really good, easy to fit on teams, and it does a lot for you, but there are plenty of ways to respond to it. Even if you don't have a dedicated check, there are ways to game plan against it. In Gen 7, the number one Pokemon is Magearna. I think that over the years, Magearna had some competition with Landorus Therian, Toxapex, and Ash Greninja for the number one spot, but in the modern day, in the most recent viability ranking, Magearna is on the top, and I can't disagree with that placement. Magearna is a crazy Pokemon in Gen 7. It's got that excellent Steel Fairy typing, fantastic stats, and some truly incredible traits in every department. Its special attacking move pool is vast, with options like Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, the incredible Stab Fluor Cannon, Volt Switch for pivoting, and you even have Shift Gear for a speed boost. What's more, you have the ability Soul Heart, which grants a special attack boost to Magearna if the enemy faints, and this includes if they faint to mechanics like Poison or Hazards. You don't have to KO them yourself, they just have to faint to anything, and you get a Soul Heart special attack boost. This is obviously incredible with Shift Gear and Z moves, because you can speed boost up, hit something with a Z move, probably KO them, and now you're snowballing to infinity thanks to your Soul Heart ability. But Magearna can also serve a defensive purpose with Assault Vest sets that are able to check just about any special attacker barring fire types. You can then pivot out or just do a big Fluor Cannon. Even these sets can pose a significant offensive threat thanks to the Fluor Cannon power and Soul Heart ability. This Pokemon is nuts, and in later generations it gets banned to Ubers for clear reasons. In Gen 7 it's legal. So what does Magearna have going against it? What are some of its flaws? Magearna is at least slow and vulnerable to common types, especially ground and fire. It's threatened by Landorus Therian's Earthquake, Heatran's various fire type moves, and also Magearna has no recovery option. It often doesn't run leftovers either. Some sets run leftovers and Pain Split, but most sets are going to run a Z move or an Assault Vest. So you can be sure that your chip against Magearna is at least going to stick. It's going to be permanent, as Magearna does struggle to actually heal itself back up. The aggressive Shift Gear sets do at least thud a little bit into Pokemon like Blissey and Chansey. I mean, you can't always afford to run those Pokemon though in Gen 7. Very fast-paced metagame. And these sets frankly can feel a bit broken, because Magearna can have so much coverage, hit you with many different options for Z moves, and can easily overwhelm you in just a single turn of setup too. But there are ways to wall them. You can play around it kind of, I don't know. I actually do think Magearna in Gen 7 is quite overtuned and broken. So it's a little bit difficult to call that a flaw. I think the Shift Gear sets are crazy. But at least the guy is slow, threatened by a lot of stuff, gets chipped down by spikes and other such things. But don't get it twisted, this is a broken Pokemon. This is a crazy Pokemon. I am really grasping at straws to come up with flaws for this. Like, yes, okay, it can't heal, but it could do everything else on the planet, can't it? In Generation 8, the #1 Pokemon is Dragapult. Dragapult is the all-new pseudo-legendary of Gen 8, and it is a fantastic one that saw immediate success in competitive and rose to the top. Dragapult has an incredible Dragon-Ghost type combination, and Ghost types are feeling pretty comfortable in Generation 8 now that Pursuit is newly removed. Dragapult has a fantastic speed stat of base 142. It's more than fantastic, it's absolutely tremendous. And Dragapult has reasonable bulk considering how fast it is, and good offensive stats too. You have a vast move pool with important options like U-Turn, Draco Meteor for stab, Shadow Ball, coverage such as Flamethrower, Thunderbolt, etc., Hydro Pump, and you even have the great ability Infiltrator, which allows you to bypass Substitute and the effect of options like Aurora Veil, Reflecting Light Screen. Dragapult can also run bulkier sets with Will-O-Wisp, Pain Split, sometimes Disable as well, and Hex to deal damage to status foes, usually your own Will-O-Wisp. But Dragapult, I think, does have a clear flaw when you look at it, and that's its low special attack stat of only 100. Interestingly, Dragapult has a high attack stat of 120, but barely any attacking options it can actually utilize. It has U-Turn, which is a great attack, but it's not really a go-to stab attack or anything. It has Dragon Darts, which is a good Dragon-type physical attack, but Dragon-type attacks are easily stopped by Fairies and Steels. Other than that, it has Shadow Force, which is an extremely telegraphed and exploitable Ghost-type move that attacks after a turn of Charge Up. So you can easily just bring in a normal type and respond to this. Dragapult does not have access to a physical attack like Shadow Claw, or even Poltergeist, which would be incredibly powerful, but doesn't have such an option. The Dragapult, even though it has a lesser special attack, usually relies on its special attacking move pool for its offensive output, because that's just where all its options are. So, although this is an incredibly fast and threatening Pokemon with a lot of coverage, its damage output is limited in that way. And it's therefore not that overwhelming. You can pretty easily respond to a Dragapult in front of you, even if it has a choice specs equipped. I actually think Dragapult is pretty well designed in this regard. It feels very easy to chuck on a team. It's going to be useful, but it's also not going to overwhelm your opponent that easily. They will have a bit of breathing room because your damage output is fairly limited with this Pokemon. And in Generation 9, the #1 Pokemon in the game at the moment is Kingambit. And that's been the case for most of Generation 9's lifespan. For a time, Great Tusk did claim the top spot, but these days, it's Kingambit. Kingambit is an incredible new evolution for Bisharp with much higher stats and a much more frightening presence. Kingambit has the all-new ability Supreme Overlord, And this ability is insane in 6v6 singles. It's broken. Supreme Overlord grants a 10% damage boost to all your moves for each fainted ally. And this stacks up to 5. So if your entire team has been eliminated, you have a 50% damage boost, which is incredibly significant. Especially because the damage boost from Supreme Overlord is not ignored by Unaware, which is a popular way to ignore offensive boost. This is a flat increase to all of your power, so Dondozo will even be completely blown up by a Kingambit with enough Supreme Overlord boosts. On top of this, Kingambit is just incredibly bulky with high defense. Its attack is massive, it has Swords Dance, and Sucker Punch is the real kicker, a priority option that will move first if your enemy uses an attack. There's a bit of a mind game when using Sucker Punch because it can be played around by not using an attack. But the priority option on something so slow is what makes this so frightening. A Kingambit last is infamous for being able to just solo entire teams on its own, with Sucker Punch and all those Supreme Overlord boosts. Kingambit is also a prime abuser of the Terastalize mechanic, allowing it to sometimes just straightforwardly increase its dark type damage with Terra Dark to power through enemies like Dondozo, even using black glasses for even more dark type damage. You can also Terra Fairy for defensive benefit, allowing you to resist incoming hits from fighting types. Terra Flying does the same, but allows you a ground immunity, which is great. Terra Fire allows you to become burn immune, which is really nice, as burn is a common way to handle Kingambit. Yeah, this Pokemon's pretty insane. It's incredibly powerful, and beating it consistently can feel tough. Zamazenta was demoted from Ubers partially to add another option that can actually handle this thing. Defensive Pokemon like Dondozo do pretty well into it. It's not always going to have the Supreme Overlord boost, and if it does, it means its team is dead, so that's an inherent drawback. I think the main thing keeping Kingambit in check the most is just that it has a poor matchup against one of the most popular Pokemon in the format, Great Tusk. Great Tusk has a ground fighting combination, which threatens Kingambit twice over. You know, a stab, headlong rush, earthquake, close combat, body press, whatever. All of these are going to just one-shot Kingambit pretty easily. And you also resist Dark, which is crucial. Kingambit needs to spend Terastalize to 1v1 you. Terra Flying can catch Great Tusk off guard as you gain fighting resistance and ground immunity, but Great Tusk at least has Ice Spinner to be able to hit Kingambit post Terastalize. And if your mere presence forces the enemy to Terastalize, I think you could view that as a positive thing. If not for Great Tusk being so easy to fit on teams and threatening Kingambit so much, I think this thing would probably be banned. And so there you have it, folks. Every single #1 Pokemon of every generation trying to highlight their disadvantages and drawbacks. Some of these were difficult to come up with. As you might expect, these are Pokemon known for being excellent. They are known for not having that many drawbacks, so sometimes I'm grasping at straws here, especially with Pokemon like Snorlax and Magearna, who are just so excellent. But some of these Pokemon feel pretty balanced, such as Gen 3 Tyranitar and Excadrill in Gen 6, I feel are pretty easy to respond to. They have their share of drawbacks. They aren't necessarily auto-includes or that dominant to an unhealthy extent, in my opinion. It is interesting how these #1 Pokemon define each of their generations. And the way that these formats have evolved around their presence is also quite cool to take a look at. But what do you think of my observations here? Who is your favorite #1 Pokemon from any of these generations? Mine is Tyranitar. And what would you like me to talk about next? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.